Hello, friends, and welcome to Doug Reads with Friends. On this podcast, I invite a friend to choose a book. We both read that book, and then we come on the podcast for a conversation about their life, about our friendship, and about the book that they've chosen. The book is the excuse to have the conversation, but the conversation is what keeps us here and is really the point. This is a very different episode of Doug Reads with Friends, and I say that with great sadness, because today's episode was supposed to be a conversation with my dear friend and great mentor, Steve Langerud. He was somebody I worked with for 8 years, and he remained my mentor for over 25 years. Steve had chosen a book. We had both read that book, and we were in the process of scheduling a time to record this podcast when I got the horrible, horrible news that Steve had had a stroke and had passed away at just 66, 67 years old. I almost immediately thought, I'm doing a Steve podcast anyway. I can't record it with Steve, but I'm going to have an episode of Doug Reads with Friends, which is dedicated to Steve and dedicated to his memory, and invite on a few people who are mutual friends of ours who could tell some Steve stories, could share some Steve memories, or just a general sense of who he was, how he lived his life, and why he was such an absolutely extraordinary person. I miss Steve deeply already. I cannot think of a major decision that I have made in the last 25 years that I did not talk with Steve about first. And he is someone that I think about almost every single day at work, because basically everything I know about how to advise students, all of the ways that I talk to students, I question them, I help them think about their futures, all of that comes from Steve. A lot of it directly, verbatim, ideas he had, questions he asked, pieces of advice he gave. I am the advisor I am today because of the way that Steve invested in me, and I will be eternally grateful to him for how he invested in me. I want to be clear that this is not supposed to be a life retrospective of Steve. I knew Steve in one very specific setting, which was his work at Grinnell and his life in Grinnell. That was a huge part of who he was. But there were parts before I knew him. I know some of his friends from college were some of his very best friends and were incredibly important to him. His family is not represented here. His work after he left Grinnell College, when he went to University of Iowa Law School to work there, DePauw University, back to the town of Grinnell to run the Mayflower community, other stops in between, his consulting work, which he did a ton of. None of that is really represented here. And that's not to slight any of those parts of his life. It's just, for me, I thought I'm just going to call up a few people who I know Steve, who I know loved Steve, and who would want to participate in this project. So I hope that this is something that people who knew Steve will appreciate and will see their sense of Steve reflected in him. And for those of you who didn't know Steve, I hope you will listen and learn about a truly wonderful, humane, caring, good person who had an incredible sense of humor, which I'm going to talk about some, because some of the times I have laughed the hardest in my life were with Steve Langerud. And as much as I miss him, I'm also going to remember all of those good times and all of those laughs we shared. I hope that you'll enjoy this very special episode of Doug Reads with Friends. Who are you and how did you know Steve?
Rachel Bly. I was a student who graduated 93. I worked in the financial aid office as a student, and then after I graduated, career development and financial aid were right next to each other. And so every day when I'd come to work, there Steve would be, and we would say hello, chat, and we sort of became friends first and colleagues, afterwards, because I was a student at the beginning. And I also babysat for Emma when she was a tiny little tot. I did a lot of babysitting in college. And so when they had Emma, I was one of their first babysitters.
Wow. And now Emma's a mom as well.
Exactly.
Can you walk through a little bit of your relationship with Steve and maybe how it's changed over the years?
We were in Mears Cottage. And so it was like a big old house, basically. And we were all pretty close. And there was a lot of young people working in that area then. And Steve was very into biking. That this is one thing where not everybody had that connection to him, but that was one of our connections, was biking. And so he wanted to do a fun activity with folks from Mears. And so he created MAGBRAHS, which was the Mears annual Great Bike Ride along Highway 6.
I've never heard of this. That's great.
And so he got a group of us. There's probably 10 of us that were willing to ride our bikes to the Amanas. We decided we needed like an end point. And so we rode our bikes to the Amanas.
That's pretty
and then,
far, though. I mean,
Yeah,
and
it
there's
was
a lot of hills between here and there.
Yeah, it was a serious ride. It was like 50 some miles, I think. And then he conned people into meeting us there with trucks. So we could end at the Ronenberg, have a humongous breakfast, and then all be able just to like load our bikes and get a ride home.
Community, bikes, and food. This maybe
Yep.
is the holy trinity of Steve Langerud. If we get vinyl in there somewhere as well, that'll complete the picture.
Yeah.
That's marvelous.
That is probably my like core Steve memory.
I'm guessing a lot of people who are going to listen to this podcast are people who know Steve and remember him and love him. For somebody who maybe didn't know Steve, how would you describe him?
As probably one of the best listeners I have ever met. That's one of those things that I think kind of weaves its way through every way that I have known Steve throughout the years. And his ability to build relationships and to keep those relationships, that's related to the listening piece. Even though it was years maybe from one interaction with him into another, I'd see him around town and things, but I wasn't seeing him frequently. You would just reconnect like it had been yesterday. That ability and that sort of genuine care and an ability to connect with people was just amazing. Absolutely.
Rachel, any other memories you wanted to share or stories or things you wanted to make sure you said?
Put something about Steve's death on ECN, which is the Grinnell alumni Facebook group, and got so many neat little stories from alums. And I think the one thing that was sort of kind of woven throughout them was this: he stayed in touch. I could reach back out to him at any time and ask for career advice, even if it was 20 years later. And just the care of that was so instrumental to people, not just when they were leaving college and entering the world, but throughout their entire lives.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate you taking time to do this.
Awesome. Thank you.
I also want to make sure that I get to tell some of my own favorite Steve stories and anecdotes and memories as a part of this podcast. One thing that Steve and I had in common and that we enjoyed together to an incredible degree is a genre of movie that I will refer to as inappropriate comedy. There were several movies that we went to together of this genre. The Jackass franchise, Borat, and the documentary The Aristocrats, which is a documentary about the world's dirtiest joke. We would go to these movies together and we would laugh until the tears were streaming down our faces and then refer back to them many, many, many times. There was one comment in particular that stayed with us and that we referred to again and again and again for decades afterwards, which is that after we went to see The Aristocrats in Des Moines, it was showing in a theater and it was not a packed theater. It was maybe 7 of us total. I believe Steve and I were sitting on one side of the theater. And then on the other side of the theater were maybe 5 Drake University frat bros. It's a hysterical movie. And the 7 of us laughed very, very hard and enjoyed the entire thing. And as the credits rolled and the lights came up, we all started to walk out of the theater. Kind of, that feeling where like your face hurts and your sides hurt from laughing so hard. All just kind of shaking our heads at that movie. And one of the Drake University frat bros says, "That did not disappoint." And that phrase, "that did not disappoint," was something that Steve and I said again and again and again for many, many years afterwards in all sorts of situations, in all sorts of settings, and about all sorts of things. That did not disappoint was a catchphrase of ours coming from that movie, but also thinking about so many of the other movies that we saw.
I'm Thomas Crady. I was vice president of Grinnell College, started in 1982, and hired Steve as an RA in 1986. And, the rest is kind of history. He was one of the best staff members I ever had. Came back as a director of career services. Before that, I believe he was assistant director. And then he took a couple of years off and then came back. And it really kind of worked out. I mean, it was like the stars aligned, to be honest with you.
What made him such a great staff member?
He embraced Grinnell. He understood the quirkiness right away. He's somebody I could always rely upon. I mean, he had good judgment. He was thoughtful. He really listened to what students had to say. He was just a good person. I was really happy when I saw that he took over as director of the Mayflower, because I thought he'd be a good person. But then I realized that all those constituents, many of them were Grinnell faculty members. So that could not have been easy, right? And I think during his tenure, there was not a single case of COVID there.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, which is unheard of for a care agency. It didn't surprise me, but to anybody else on the outside looking in, it's remarkable. But he was somebody I'd sit down and talk to about, should we do this or not do this? He's probably one of the only people I really talk to about really sensitive stuff related to the presidents I work for and so on.
I know the two of you had an amazing relationship. I mean, Steve would often tell me, he would say, I've asked Tom to give me a year heads up before he leaves because I can't work for anybody else. And he was deeply loyal to you. What do you think made your working relationship together? I mean, I was deeply loyal to Steve and learned a lot from him. I feel like Steve was deeply loyal to you and learned a lot from you. What do you think made your relationship so good with him?
We were just very open with each other and very comfortable with each other. And I trusted his judgment. I think he trusted mine. I don't always make the best decisions, as you probably know, with who followed him. I think a good leader has the ability to say they make mistakes, and Steve could do that. And that was something I had no problem with. I mean, it's so easy to misstep at Grinnell. He just had the judgment. And so I think that's how our relationship evolved over the years.
Anything else you wanted to add or talk about, or any other favorite Steve memories you want to make sure you said?
As you probably know, being a VP for Student Affairs or Dean of Students at Grinnell, you're going to run into issues where you're just not going to win. One constituency is going to be furious with you and the other one's not. And Steve would help me out there, I think, in terms of, trying to make the right, and you realize that you just have to be yourself and do what you think is right. And if you try to please everybody, you're not going to do that. And I think he was like that a lot and very good at that. I mean, students loved him. He handled complex student situations really well. Even when I had really hot open forums, Steve was always there to support me with that. And that was really helpful to me. And I'd say to him afterwards, what do you think? Is there anything I could have improved upon or, whatever? And he said, no, you're just being yourself. And he said, people are going to disagree with you. And that's just Grinnell. And it is.
Steve was a man of great and deep passions. He had a few things that he invested in very deeply: cooking, basketball, bicycling, his family. I'm not quite going to argue blue button-down dress shirts like the one I'm wearing today in homage of him, but this is what he wore pretty much every day. I'm not sure it was a passion of his, but it was certainly a habit of his that he cultivated. But maybe his greatest passion was his passion for music on vinyl. Everything had to be on vinyl, and he had to have the best speakers, and he would want to tell you about them and explain them to you and make you sit in the sweet spot in his living room where you could just get the audio just right. And there's a story I need to tell about one day when I walked into the office and I said, Steve, something happened last night. I had a great responsibility. He said, what's that? I said, well, my daughter, Emma, who was maybe 5 years old at the time, was sitting at dinner, and she said, Dad, do we have any rock and roll music? Steve's eyes got big. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I've heard of rock and roll music, but I don't know what it is. Can you play some rock and roll music for me? Steve got visibly excited. Oh my goodness. Whatever you do in this moment is going to expose her to rock and roll. And this is what she's going to hold in her memory for her lifetime, as this is the definition of rock and roll. He says, so what did you do? And I said, I I thought long and deep and hard about it. And then I put on AC/DC. I have never seen anyone as disappointed, frustrated, upset, and legitimately angry as Steve was. He went, "Oh, oh, no, what? No, oh, no, oh, you had The Who, you had the Rolling Stone, you could have gone with the Beatles. The Beatles aren't a great choice, but AC/DC." And then he literally reached over and he grabbed his phone and he dialed for the operator and he said, "Can I have Child Protective Services, please?" He was so frustrated and so upset that of all the choices I could have possibly gone with to define rock and roll music, AC/DC, I had to admit, he had a point. Sorry, Steve. He never let me forget that. I don't think he ever truly forgave me for my choice of AC/DC. They're an Australian band. They're not even, oh.
I'm Meg Jones Bair, and I've had the privilege of working for Grinnell over 30 years now. Steve was here during much of my tenure, always welcoming, always kind, and looking to be the positive light in somebody's day.
Do you have a particular memory of Steve or a really good Steve story you'd like to share?
So I did think about it long and hard, and every story for me really pointed to who I saw him to be every day to every person. And that to me was better than any story because he had this unwavering commitment to positivity. He was always looking for the good in every encounter, every person he had. And he always asked the right questions at the right time of the right people to help them on their own journey, whatever that may be. And to me, that constant part of who he is and all he was to the world is more important to me than any one-on-one story we shared together.
You were director of the alumni office for a long time at Grinnell.
Yeah.
And Steve worked a lot with alumni. Was there anything in kind of how you saw him engaging with alums or inspiring people to stay connected to Grinnell?
Certainly his work with, and I will get the title wrong, but whatever it was, the Center for Teaching and Learning at that point in time, he had the gift of helping people find their own journey. He could have very easily, for any student that came in there, crafted a plan. They could have taken the plan and that would have made them successful. But his gift, one of his greatest gifts, was asking people the right questions so they took ownership over their own journey and together they co-created that. The alums and others that came to him were invested in their own success, not just the investment because it was a career development office.
Grinnell's a small town. Did you work with Steve or encounter Steve in outside of the workplace settings?
You know, I had the privilege of knowing Steve first, and then our daughter got to go to the preschool and be with Karen and all of the excellence that she and Connie produced over there. There was a time at which I engaged him to help us with a retreat internally when he wasn't at the college anymore. He was at a different place. And it, of course, felt like old home week. You know, Steve's back being who he is, guiding our team to a result that we wanted and that he can see, even if you don't, didn't tell him. He can read the room in so many ways, skillful ways that brought us to a very positive end of day retreat reflection.
Leading those retreats for all sorts of organizations was something he was masterfully skilled at and really, really enjoyed. Any other ideas or stories or things you wanted to make sure that you said here?
I think the world has been a much better place to have Steve Langerud in it, Grinnell College, especially the Mayflower, all of the places he's been, because if you weren't having the best of days, you encountered him and that you left with a smile on your face.
The next story I want to tell is a story about the greatest April Fool's Day joke I think I have ever played. Definitely the most successful April Fool's Day joke I have ever played. And it was on Steve. So Steve had left Grinnell College, where he had been head of the Career Development Center, and he was at the University of Iowa Law School, running the Career Development Center there. I was still working at Grinnell, and I concocted a plan to tell Steve that I was in trouble and that I needed his help. Not, physical danger or anything like that. Nothing that was going to make him worry for my safety in the moment. But the story that I concocted was that I had been walking on campus and it had been Love Your Body Week at Grinnell College, which is an actual week at Grinnell College, at least then, an opportunity for students to celebrate all sorts of different bodies. It's a lovely idea. And one of the things that they do during Love Your Body Week at Grinnell, this is an actual thing that they do, is that the students put on a clothing optional photo shoot. And so it's an opportunity for students to get together in a private setting, and you can wear as many or as few clothes as you want to celebrate your body in this photo shoot. So what I told Steve was that I had been walking my dog on campus one night, and I had walked by the place where they were doing the clothing optional photo shoot. All of that part actually is true. It's where I got the idea of this from. At that point, I then walked my dog home in real life and had nothing to do with it. But what I told Steve was that I had been walking past the clothing optional photo shoot, and some students came out who I knew, and they saw me and they said, "Doug, we would love to have your support. It means so much to us when faculty and staff support our efforts like this. Do you want to just come in and say hi?" And so I went in, and then they were like, "Well, you should take some photos. And, it's clothing optional. You can wear your clothes." And so I took some photos, and then they said it's clothing optional. And Steve, before you knew it, I was naked and doing a photo shoot with students. Let me reiterate, that part is not true. That is not true at all. I would never do that. That's a terrible idea that crosses every boundary. Not going to do that. But what I did was that I created a series of emails that were between me and the then head of student affairs at Grinnell College, saying that this had happened and that I needed to come in, and making it very, very clear that I was in serious danger of being fired for having done this thing, which I did not do. And so I forwarded this completely fictitious email chain to Steve on April Fool's Day and said, "Steve, I'm in deep trouble. I really need your help. Can you please give me some advice on how I need to handle this? This meeting is happening at 2:00 today." And within 10 minutes, my phone rang. He bought it hook, line, and sinker. "All right, here's what you need to do. All right, so the very first thing you have to do is you have to take responsibility for this. You have to admit that he started giving me outstanding advice. I'm covering my mouth. I'm trying not to laugh out loud. I'm letting him go. I could only go about 30 seconds before I said, "Steve, I have to interrupt you, and I have to wish you a happy April Fool's Day." There was this pause and then this burst of laughter. "Oh, you got me. You got me so good." Every year on April Fool's Day, for years and years after that, I would get an email or a call from Steve. "It's April Fool's Day, and I'm just thinking about how you got me so good with that. It was a moment we cherished." It was a great memory that the two of us had for many, many years after, was the April Fool's Day prank I successfully pulled on Steve Langerud. And let me reiterate, I did not go to a clothing optional photo shoot with students. I would never do that. That is not part of my history. But I got him good. Could you start off by just introducing yourself and talking a little bit about how you knew Steve?
So, Joyce Stern. I am, I suppose in this context, maybe most importantly, I'm a Grinnell alum from the class of 1991. I really needed coaching because I had done nothing to prepare for life after Grinnell. And so that's when I started having some conversations with Steve about, what in the heck I was going to do.
And what was that like? How did those conversations go?
I do remember very well, one of his counseling styles was to just really put people at ease and always try to engender some confidence. Because I think that one of the things that young people don't have always is they have the skills usually. They really do have what it takes to do something. They still have the confidence. And he would often start the meeting. We'd sit down and go, "How can I make your life better?" And it was just one of those like one-liners that
I'm stealing that.
It's so great. And I use it occasionally. Especially when I can tell somebody's in a really negative space. They walk in and they just don't sort of look like their best. But it conveyed two things, right? It conveyed that he had your back, but it also conveyed that better was possible.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and that you've got a teammate, right? That you've got someone on your
Exactly.
side.
Yeah.
We're in the, all right,
Exactly.
let's do this together, buddy.
And then having it dawn on me that, like, wait a minute, some of the most impactful people I've met at Grinnell not just Steve, but Diane Young and some other folks, Dave Clark. These were folks working. I was like, wait a minute, I could have like your job. It was just such a funny moment of kind of like this aha. Anyway, but I do remember that some of those first job searches were really hard. And I don't remember which one I was in the middle of, but I kept talking to Steve even after I graduated. And I remember I was just in this negative headspace, and he's just always optimistic and confident. And I remember him saying something like, he just looked at me and he goes, good people get jobs. Just like looked at me like, duh, it's gonna be fine. He had
That's
that,
wonderful.
he had that way of being able to just inspire folks to, I don't know, again, it was about confidence building, I guess.
You and I worked for Steve together. When I first
I
came back to
know.
Grinnell in summer 1999, you were working in the Career Development Center. So you worked directly for Steve. How did your relationship with him evolve as you went from a student that he was advising to an employee that he was supervising and that you were being mentored by?
Really, those were really fun times, right? Like he was so good at creating an office environment where how do I put this? He hired people who wanted to get things done. He was smart enough to like hire like driven people. Everybody, I mean, if you think about everybody in that space, they were like, let's get this done. But he always, I mean, he provided a lot of vision. That was his strength, right? He was just blue skying it all the time. Like, let's do this. Let's imagine this. What else could we do? Like, he was just visionary. And he also just wanted to have a fun office environment. He didn't want us to just be serious and stoic all the time. So I felt like that was such a nice combination of leadership to be offering folks who were get it doners the opportunity to think in a big picture way and keep things light when it needed to be light. Yeah, his vision extended not just to opportunities, but very much to people and people's potential.
Absolutely.
And that is such a gift. He was just a gift to me. I mean, I just feel like so lucky that he was part of one of the most important mentors to me ever, truly.
I said in the introduction that I did not make a major life decision in the last 25 years without talking with Steve first. And I really think that that's very true. I want to give an example of that. A lot of the stories that I've told and the anecdotes that I've shared and the memories have been quite humorous. And I want to share a little bit more of a serious one. Several years ago, I was contemplating leaving NYU Abu Dhabi. I was a finalist for a job in the United States at a well-known prestigious institution. I was thinking very closely about this because Anjana, now my wife, then my partner, there were not a lot of employment opportunities for her in the place where this institution is. And we were really uncertain of what she might do there. And a lot of her work is here in this part of the world. And we were contemplating whether or not we should have a long distance relationship, whether or not this was something that we could make work across continents if she stayed in this part of the world and I moved back to the United States. I was really torn about this. I was really conflicted about this. And so I reached out to probably a half dozen of my closest friends and confidants and advisors, and I explained, this is the situation. This is what we're thinking about. This is what we're trying to decide. What do you think? You know me really well. What's your advice to me in this situation? Everybody came back and said, if you get that job, you've got to take it. It's a career-changing job. It is a huge step up for you. This is something that you need to go do. Everybody said that, except for one person, Steve Langerud. Steve came back and he said, there will be other jobs. There will never be another Anjana. The way she makes you smile is bigger than anyone I have ever seen. Do not mess this up. Do not lose this opportunity. And I realized in reading his message, that was the advice I was looking for. That was what I wanted someone to tell me. That confirmed exactly what I knew inside, but I was having a hard time articulating. And so even though he was the only voice on that side, I listened to him. And I stayed at NYU Abu Dhabi and I stayed with Anjana, and he was 100% right. There is only one Anjana. There is only one relationship like this that makes me as happy as I am. And that other job would not make me as happy as this relationship. Steve knew that, even though he never met Anjana, even though he never saw us together, He knew that, and he knew what I needed. He was a phenomenal advisor. He got to the heart. He knew what questions to ask. He knew what really mattered. He knew how to distill a decision down to its constituent parts and say, this matters, this doesn't. Focus on this. These are your values. This is stuff you can forget. And that's what made him such an incredible advisor to me and to so many other people. I don't know what I'm going to do the next time I have to make a big decision. I'm just going to have to channel my own inner Steve Langerud and hope that I can call on that wisdom, because I'm really going to miss him next time I have to make a decision like that. So, Amy, there's a lot of people I'm asking to come on and I say, so, do you have a favorite memory or a story about Steve? I'm not going to toss it open to you and say, oh, what is any story you want to tell? You have to tell the story, because you and I and Steve had one story together that I honestly think it's absolutely in the top 5 moments of laughter of my life, and maybe it's vying for number 1, that's for sure. So can you tell that story, please?
You and Steve and I had an experience in the conference room of 1127 Park Street. But it was just the 3 of us in there. I don't know if we were having a work meeting or not, but all of a sudden, we were talking about a friend of ours, a RA, a resident advisor. He had taken a job at Ursinus College. Our little eyes started twinkling, and as I remember it, one of us started, and the similarity between Ursinus and Uranus, if you can remember any time where you went nuts over the word Uranus and started in doing riffs about something happened, at Uranus or in Uranus or whatever. And we did that with Ursinus. And we just laughed so hard that tears. It was a number 1 laugh of my life. I know it was. I'm not a very funny person. I mean, I can do a little bit, but you are definitely, and Steve definitely is. But like, we would just take turns and we would each come up with a riff on Ursinus, up Uranus, I don't know, something like that. And we just were in hilarity. And then there would be silence for a moment after we stopped laughing and crying. And then another one would come. And I may be exaggerating this, but Doug, I think it went on for an hour and a half. Maybe it was an hour, maybe it was 15 minutes, but it was the most fun I have ever had. Just like you're doing now, we just went into, I can't imagine I'm getting it right now. All my little
I'm
things
crying.
can
I'm
feel
just
it.
remembering it. I'm crying, laughing so hard.
But this was just, and no disrespect to Ursinus College, because it probably is a great place. But we had so much fun on the name that day, and I can't imagine what their T-shirts look like. But anyway, I think we bonded during that time. The last couple of maybe 6 weeks have been really an amazing time for me. There's been a series of what I'll call synchronicities or meaningful coincidences that have happened. And this is just one of them, though I think it kind of kicked it off. So what happened was I was reading this book by a physician named Mr. Beitman, who did research on synchronicity and coincidence. And he begins to talk about a colleague from Ursinus College in Pennsylvania. And I listen to that name and I get a little chuckle. And then he refers to it multiple times through this book. And finally I'm done listening and I think, I can't let this go. Having just read this book, I just thought, I am going to contact both those guys and just see if they remember that even. Because for some reason, I thought they won't even remember it. You guys are so funny and have so much fun, you won't even remember it. I've got Steve's number, of course, but we did it through Messenger, which I don't often use. And I let you know, I just said I had this experience, and if you remember it as funny, I just wanted to let you know, and that it was one of the funniest things I've ever had. And I don't know, I just felt so close to you guys in that moment. I think a deep laugh is kind of akin to one of the most intimate things you can do. So vulnerable. It's so ridiculous. And no one would quite understand, although people have had, other experiences like that. But once I let you know that had happened to me, you got right back to me and said, remember it. I've never forgotten that. But then I didn't hear back from Steve. And maybe you could tell your side of the story from there.
Yeah. Well, you sent that message on, I think, a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And I think I replied Thursday or Friday. And that Friday night was the night that Steve had his stroke, and he was gone by the end of the weekend, I think. And so, you used the word synchronicity in a message right after that. And I think it's a perfect word for that, is that, you had that thought and you reached out to the two of us just in time. And, we don't know if he saw that message or not, but Amy, I guarantee with 1,000% certainty that he remembers that and laughed about it as hard as you did. Because I will tell you that in the 20 plus years since that happened, every time I have seen a headline about the planet Uranus, I have sent it to Steve Langerud. That joke
guarantee.
Continued for the two of us over years and years and years. And I remember even saying to him once recently, someday the day may come when I see a headline about Uranus and I don't send it to you. But today is not that day. We would, we'd be talking about housing in Uranus and we'd die laughing, and then it would calm down. And then somebody would say, like, how are the meal plans, are the vegetarian options in Uranus? And we'd be gone again. Ah.
Well, thank God you can remember some of
humor.
them. I mean, how much more,
Yeah.
enter God's kingdom like a child. How much more ridiculous can you be than doing that? But it was,
Anything else you wanted to add, or other thoughts you wanted to share?
I just loved Steve so much. And I had the same experience so many others did, both sort of professionally, that he believed in me way before I ever believed that I could do anything. And he just sort of led me through. And he was such a joy to be with and work with.
What a wonderful legacy. Amy, thank you so much for having this conversation. That was exactly what I hoped it would be.
Wonderful. It's great to see you, Doug.
Well, it's time to wrap up this special episode of Doug Reads with Friends, remembering Steve Langerud. And I want to say one last thing before we wrap up. I started this episode by noting that I had invited Steve to come on the podcast. He had chosen a book, I had read it, and we were scheduling a time to record this episode when I got the terrible news that he had passed. What I haven't told you is the book that he chose. Steve and I were emailing back and forth, and he said, I'd like us to read the book, A Hard Kick in the Nuts by Stephen Glover. And I thought, that's interesting. I've never heard of that book or that author. A Hard Kick in the Nuts. That's a very provocative title. I mean, that strikes me as a title such as A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius, or Incredibly Loud and Extremely Close, right? One of those book titles that you hear and you're like, oh, that's just going to stick in my imagination. I wonder what that book is about, A Hard Kick in the Nuts. And then I Googled it. And the book is by Steve-O. That's who Stephen Glover is, from the Jackass movies. And when he says a hard kick in the nuts, he literally means a hard kick in the nuts, because that's who Steve-O was. And that's what the Jackass movies are about. That's frequently what happens to Steve-O in those movies. Steve-O was always Steve's favorite. Okay, I'm going to say something now that some people may consider to be in bad taste. It is perhaps an inappropriate joke. It is a joke that displays some dark humor. It is also a joke that I think Steve would love. Steve, you win. Because this book sucked. I hated this book. And I am deeply convinced that Steve Langerud chose a book that sucked and made me read it. I don't think he ever read the book. I think he just made me read this piece of trash book. And that is a better joke than my April Fool's Day joke. Steve, you win, my friend. And I miss you. And that did not disappoint. Thank you, friends, for listening to this special episode of Doug Reads with Friends. I hope that this gave you a good sense of who Steve was, if you didn't know him, and if you did know him, perhaps gave you some smiles and some memories of your own to think about as we all miss this absolutely remarkable and wonderful man. Steve's obituary, I don't know who wrote it, but thank you so much. You did an absolutely incredible job of capturing his warmth and his humanity and his values. And I really, really appreciate that. If you haven't read Steve's obituary, I would encourage you to do so. I know it's on the Smith Family Funeral Home website in the town of Grinnell. I'd like to thank everyone who came on the podcast today, Meg and Rachel and Tom and Joyce and Amy, for sharing some wonderful memories, some specifics, some generalities, some things they'll always miss about Steve, and ways that he will remain in their memory for a long, long time to come. If you are so moved, there are several organizations that Steve's family have designated for memorial donations. Those include the Mayflower Community Human Needs Fund, Imagine Grinnell, the Prairie Burn 100, or Drake Community Library. I'd like to say a special note to Steve's family, especially to his wife Karen, to his children Emma and John, and to his granddaughter Marley, who I know he absolutely adored. You don't need me to tell you how much Steve loved all of you and how much you were the center of his world, but he talked about you all the time. And being your husband, your father, your grandfather was the greatest joy of his life. If you have any comments or questions, or just want to reach out with your own memories of Steve, you can reach me at dougreadswithfriends@gmail.com. Friends, this was not the episode I wanted to record. I was really looking forward to having a conversation with Steve about that trash book that he picked out. I really miss him a lot. Thank you to everyone who contributed to this. Thank you, Steve, for everything.